So it's 8 o'clock. So welcome everybody. I've got a few things that I need to say. The first is welcome to Zoom. So I think most people here are really familiar, but just to let you know, unless you would like to ask a question at the end and I promote you and you know it's going to happen, people can't see you, they can't hear you, so you're very welcome to be in your pajamas. You can have a packet of crisps. It's not going to disturb anybody apart from you, whoever's sitting next to you. But you can communicate with us. We do know that you're there, so we can see who's here. We've got your names in the list. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a little box that says chat. So if you click on that, you can see a little chat box pop up. So you can talk to the other people who are here, and you can talk to me, and you can talk to Linda. And if as we go through, you have burning questions, there's a Q&A, so you can put some questions up on there as well. So we are here by the power of Zoom, and I need to say thank you very much to Get a Word and Edgeways Festival. So this is their Zoom account. I am running spoken word concerts for them on the second Thursday of the month, but they're letting me borrow it to do every Tuesday this storytelling talk show. So we can get started properly. I'm really excited about tonight because this whole idea for a storytelling talk show came out of the fact that I have been working all this year on an Arts Council England project, working on some tapes that I inherited from Duncan. I got several big boxes of reel-to-reel tapes that were recorded mostly by Linda. So they recorded in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s.
Not the 60s, not the 60s.
There are a couple that say 1969 on them.
Okay, those were me then. They were earlier ones, yeah.
No, they're your tapes, but I think they might have been Barbara McDermott or somebody. So there's just a couple of older ones, mostly the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And so I have had this year trying to digitize those tapes before they degrade, and to work with them, to listen to them, and to work out the best ways of sharing those stories, because Duncan did not want to have those stories recorded to just sit in an archive and occasionally be listened to online. The whole point about stories is that they are living and they need to be passed on, and they need to live and they need to breathe. And so one of the things I was going to do as the Arts Council project was to have conversations about Duncan and his stories and record them as podcasts. And I can't really quite get the quality up to do that. But with Zoom, now we can actually look at people and talk to people. So these conversations are mostly revolving around Duncan. There might be sort of spreading out into other areas of storytelling. We had Sheena Arnold next week, but tonight is a person who I think you need Duncan better really than anybody else. And that is Linda Williamson, who was, of course, married to Duncan. And we kind of know about you from later on. We know about you as Duncan's wife, but you're an American. And you arrived in Scotland in 1973, a classical musician, a concert pianist, going to do a master's in music at Edinburgh University. And then you end up married to a traveller living in a tent. So how did that happen?
It is a bit of a wild story, but yes, I started a Master of Music degree at Edinburgh University in 1974. We arrived in Edinburgh in the fall of that year, and the degree I started up right away at the School of Scottish Studies in studying Scottish folk music as part of the Master of Music degree. And at the School of Scottish Studies, there were wonderful people: Hamish Henderson, Alan Bruford, Archie MacDonald, Morag MacLeod, a whole host of musicians, ethnologists, storytellers, folklorists, and they were all packing their archives, the sound archives, with sound recordings of the Indigenous Gaels and the traveling people. Hamish Henderson was the one who founded the School of Scottish Studies, and he was the one who started recording among the traveling people. Now, when I heard Hamish Henderson talking and lecturing about the traveling people I immediately fell in love with the whole concept. There's people out there that I could probably talk to, and they were great musicians, great singers, great. They could play bagpipes, they could play mouth organs. They weren't playing guitars much, but Jew's harp, whistles, chanters. And because I had been trained in music in America, this was right in my lap. Do you understand? They were hoping to have some students come in and work on the music side of the tapes, on the music side of the recordings. And I fit that glove just perfectly. So that was how I got into the School of Scottish Studies on a Master of Music degree. And then the idea was that the students, the postgraduate students, would go out and do field work eventually on their own and meet informants and the people, the folk, and make recordings. And they would use those recordings for their own degree purposes. That was it. It wasn't meant to go further. It wasn't meant to be publicized or made accessible to the public. It was just for students to use. That was the idea in the beginning for the tapes that were recorded. So I started field work, yeah, in 1974 on my master's degree, but in 1973, I we had arrived. I'm not. I can't remember exactly the date here, but we arrived in Britain in 1973, and it was 1974 that we finally had a residence in Edinburgh. I was married at the time. Yep. I was married to a philosopher who was doing a PhD at the university. So both of us were students. And then how we get to Duncan. The first traveler I ever met was Betsy White of Montrose. You maybe recognize the name. She wrote The Yellow on the Broom. And Betsy White was just someone that Peter Cook and I found in a council house. We were looking for someone else by the name of White, and we ended up at Betsy's house at 33 South Esk Street. So we were recording her stories and her songs and her lore. And from her, I would get the names of other travelers in Angus, in Perthshire, and Aberdeenshire who I should visit to record ballads and songs, because that was my main topic, the ballads. And so I followed her directions. I went to visit other traveling people in Kincardineshire, Nellie Stewart, and some of the other Stewarts and the Robertsons. I didn't see Jeannie Robertson, but I met her daughter, Lizzie Higgins, and so on. And eventually they said, well, you should go and see and try to find Duncan Williamson because he knows a lot of songs and he sings ballads. And it sounds like that's the person you need to contact for your study of ballads. And so Duncan Williamson was just a name. Where was I going to find Duncan Williamson? Well, he was from Argyll, but this was October, November 1974, and or was it 1975? It was in there, and I would meet him in a potato field in Crieff. That was the first time I made contact with him. I was recording among travelers who were in caravans and in tents. I hitchhiked there with a tape recorder, blank tapes, batteries. On my back, I was walking, hitchhiking, trying to get lifts. I didn't want to hire a car. I thought it was best to approach the travelers on foot. And there was Duncan in a tent on the potato field in Crieff on a weekday morning. It had been raining, and that's why they weren't working. And he was singing his heart out, having a weekly with his friends. And I walked up to the tent with my tape recorder and my backpack and introduced myself and so on. And he was delighted to see me. And I'll tell you why. because Duncan himself had a tiny little Phillips tape recorder, and he was recording songs and ballads and historical information among his own family and among other traveling people, because it was all the go in these days to record, to have little tape recorders. This was what, this was the great new toy at the time. And so he was very familiar with recording. And I went to see him a couple of times. He was working in Leslie at Jolly's scrap store. He was there, and he was living part of the time on Tarvit Farm. It was like a midden, but it was a wee campsite that the traveling Williamsons had in the Townsleys above Cooper there in Fife. And I went to see him there and recorded material. And we had a thing going. He was singing for me, I was recording songs, and then I took him up to see Betsy White and so on. And then I want to read you this letter because we corresponded by letter. He was working at the scrap store in Leslie, and I was a student in the School of Scottish Studies, and I was married and living on Mostyn Terrace here in Edinburgh. And I wrote to Duncan, and I said I wanted to see him again, and where would I find him in the spring of the year. And this is the letter he wrote to me. Now listen very carefully. Dear Linda, I got your most welcome letter and was glad to hear you got home safe and well. I am still working at Leslie yet and will be for a while yet. I won't be going down to Argyll till after New Year. Well, Linda, I am sorry you feel troubled and sad, as I like my friend to be happy, as I never like to feel that I can make someone I like feel sad. I know you are far above me first, like a star, and I can never come into your world, as I have been on both sides of the street, and I know my place in the world. I want to be your friend, and I don't want to be a bad one. You see, Linda, I once had a friend, first like you, and we were great pals. We had some good times together. She used to take me to meet all her friends in Glasgow and Aberdeen, and we would sing old songs together, and she was my star. He's referring here to the folklorist, great song collector Helen Fullerton, who spent a lot of time among the Williamsons of Inverary, which is where Duncan's mother and father were staying. And we wrote to each other, and she knew all my life and I hers. This was Helen Fullerton. We had nothing to hide. Then she stopped coming to see me and stopped writing to me, and it nearly broke my heart. So you see how it is with me. Well, Linda, you see, I could not take it again. I would like you to come and see me anytime for as long as you like, and we will go wilt gathering and find all the old songs we can get and meet all the people in Argyll, and then you will go, and I am back to where it all started. Well, Linda, I must thank you again for coming to see me. I will never forget it. So, my little star, goodbye. Till I hear from you again, all the best. Your pal, Duncan. Well, darlings, friends, and story lovers, what would you do if you received a letter like that? I felt like I was taking something from these people and not giving anything back. And I felt it was a terrible shame to be in that circumstance and have that burden on me. And I thought they're absolutely right. This is unethical. We cannot take their songs and stories, even for the purpose of study, and not give something back to them. And what could I give? What could I give back? Well, I decided I would give myself, because that's all I really had. I didn't have money. You can't give travelers money for things that they're not interested in that. Well, I've been east and I've been west. I've traveled this far country, and the finest friend I ever had was a tinker man to me. He makes his home with canvas small, as comfortable as can be, and he will lie on his bed of straw like any king could be. He's taught me things I did not know about my own country, and the finest friend I ever had was a tinker man to me. And so that was one of Duncan's own songs. And I learned it from him and I sang it to him, and he told me the story of the song, and it had nothing to do with me. It was about another tinker Batman and a captain in an army. It was the story from Mesopotamia, a battle in World War I, and so on. And I was beginning to learn that Duncan was a true bard. He would make up songs on behalf of other people's feelings and their emotions and their love and their sorrows, but he would not make up stories. And so that's how Duncan and I got together. It was through his singing and his great knowledge of traveler lore and families and genealogy and history. And he had a great extended family. He had 7 children already. His first wife had died. I arrived on the scene and he was a widow. And his youngest daughter was age 5. And his eldest son, Bimbo, James, was in his 20s. And there were 3 sons living with Duncan when I first arrived. And eventually, as Duncan and I got closer and closer together, the 3 sons went off and lived elsewhere and got partners and got married and so on. And the little girls were still on the site where Duncan and I were living in the tent. But we did get married in 1977. In 1977, we married on the 22nd of February, 4 days before the birth of our first child, our daughter, Betsy Jane. So that's really the start of the story. Did I miss anything out?
But did you have a traveler wedding, or did you just go to?
No. I was about ready to drop. I was 9 months pregnant by that time. So it was just in the register office. But Hamish Henderson was there. He signed he was a witness. And so it was good because 4 days later I gave birth. So Betsy was true. Yeah, everything was absolutely fine. And the other problem was, of course, I had to get divorced before I could get married. So I was waiting on the divorce papers coming from my first marriage to Mark Headley there. So that all came through, though. It was all meant to be. The stars were working in our favor. So that's how we got married, and that's how we ended up in the tent, because he was living in a tent at that time. He didn't like caravans, and I didn't want to stay in a caravan, and houses weren't not on this even remotely an option. No, it was going to be a tent. I wanted to know everything about how to live in a tent, and Duncan was a master at constructing the galley and the bow tents, and he knew everything about it, all the history of the construction of tents down through the years and so on, because it was all different before the war. They lived in barricades then. instead of the galley.
I don't know how much people know about tents who are watching and listening and about traveller lifestyle. So, because obviously you've got the bow tents that are just like for a night when you're travelling, but when you were just, when Betsy was just a baby, you were on one site and you had a galley tent is a big tent. I mean, it's a pretty sturdy construction.
Yeah. But in the Horsey Man, in this book here, which is Duncan's memories, his life 1928 to 1958, we have drawings in here, Duncan's own hand drawings of the tent and the tin making articles. And we've got some lovely pictures here as well. This is a good book to get that would fill you in on details of how the tent
It
went.
is a fabulous bit. I've got my copy behind me here.
Yeah.
If you want to know.
Yeah, this was the first book that we ever wrote together, and it was actually the last one published because it took about 17 years to really get it all together. It's transcribed from his tapes, and it was hard work, but we did it. So can I tell the story about the tent now? The pocket?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
Please do.
Because time is moving on here. This is a story from Duncan's Granny Bella MacDonald. That is his mother's mother. And I just want to read a little bit about her because she was a legend in Argyll. And everybody loved Granny. She was about 4'2", couldn't wear boots, but wore wee children's sandals on her feet. She wore this old, long black apron and a shawl over her shoulders and 2 big plaits down her back. She was like a wee Indian maiden. Her face was just a bundle of wrinkles and 2 blue eyes looking out at you. She was a beautiful wee creature. So she was a legend in Argyll, still to this day. Nobody would turn Bella MacDonald from their door when she came hawking because they thought it was bad luck to turn old Bella away. She was like a fairy. She was so small and was so kind-hearted. She had a pleasant word for everybody. I mean, if she went to somebody's door and they did turn her away, she would just say, well, God bless you, missus, and thank you very much for your kindness, and walk away without spite. She was an angel to this world. Duncan's Granny Bella MacDonald was the most important person in his life as far as the stories go. And this story I'm going to tell you is absolutely true. And it's about a pocket. And Amy has a traveler woman's pocket. This is Betsy White's mother's pocket, which was given to me as a token of our great, deep, profound friendship. And the pocket, as you see there, is quite ragged and torn, but Granny's pocket.
It's just a beautiful.
It's still, yeah.
Beautiful. It is, and now it's our friendship, and this is one of the most treasured things that I possess.
Yeah.
And I would say I never give it away, but I will, because it's one of those.
It should be passed on to someone.
It will be passed on, and I'll celebrate some friendship with somebody else.
Yeah.
We'll
I gave it to Amy when Duncan died because I felt that was the moment that my life made a huge change, and I felt Amy was the person to receive that. So Granny was an old lady, and like every old traveler woman, they never carried a handbag, but around their waist, they carried a big pocket, like the one that Amy has there. And Granny made hers herself, a tartan pocket. It was like a large purse with a strap, and she tied it around her waist. It had 3 pearl buttons down the middle, no zip in these days, and Granny carried all her worldly possessions in this pocket. Now Granny smoked a little clay pipe, and when she needed tobacco, she would say to the Waynes, well, Waynes, I want you to run to the shop for tobacco for my pipe. And she'd give us a 3-penny bit, a penny for each of us and a penny for tobacco. The old man in the village used to have a roll of it on the counter, and he would cut off a little bit for Granny's penny. We came back to Granny, and our reward was Granny, tell us a story. Now, she sat there in front of her little bow tent, and she had a little billy can for boiling tea and a little fire. We collected sticks for Granny, and she'd boil this strong black tea. She lifted the can off, placed it by the side of the fire, and said, "Well, Waynes, let me see what I have for you tonight." And she opened up that big pocket by her side with the 3 pearl buttons. "Well," she said, "Waynes, I'll tell you this story," from her pocket. Now, maybe it was a story she'd told 3 nights before. Maybe it was a story she'd never told for weeks. Sometimes she told us a story 3, 4 times. Sometimes she told us a story we'd never heard. So, one day, my sister and I came back from the village. We were playing, and we came up to Granny's little tent. The sun was shining warm. Granny's little can of tea was by the fire. It was cold. The fire had been burnt out. The sun was warm. Granny was lying with her 2 hands under her head like an old woman. And her little bed was at the front of her little tent. By her side was the pocket. That was the very first time my sister and I had ever seen that pocket off Granny's waist. She probably took it off when she went to bed at nighttime, but never during the day. So my sister and I crept up quietly, and we said, "Granny's asleep. There's her pocket. Let's go and see how many stories are in Granny's pocket." So very gently, we picked the pocket up, took it behind the tree where we lived in the forest, and opened up the 3 pearl buttons. And inside the pocket was like Aladdin's cave. There were clay pipes, 3 penny pieces, rings, halfpennies, pennies, farthings, brooches, pins, needles, everything an old woman carried with her. But not one single story could we find. Thimbles? We never touched anything. We put everything back inside, put it back, left it by her side. We said, "We'll go and play, and we'll get Granny when she gets up." So off we went to play again, came back about an hour later, and Granny was up. Her little fire was kindling, and she was heating up her cold tea. We sat down beside her. She began to light her pipe, and after she drank this black, strong tea, we said, "Granny, are you going to tell us a story?" "Aye, Wayne," she said, "I'll tell you a story." She loved telling us stories because it was company for us. For boys, it was company for her to sit there beside us Waynes. She says, "Wait a minute, New. Wait till I see what I have for you tonight." And she opened up that big pocket. And she looked at me and my little sister for a while, for a long time, with her blue eyes. And she said, "You ken something, Waynes?" We said, "No, Granny." She said, "Somebody opened my pocket when I was asleep, and all my stories are gone." I can't tell you a story the next, Waynes. And Granny never told us a story that night. And Granny never told us another story. And I was 17 when my Granny died, but 11 when that's happened. Granny never told me another story. And that's a true story from Duncan. A hard lesson to learn, but is a perfect illustration, a perfect example of what it was like to live as a traveler. It was a lot of fun. It was beautiful being close to nature, but there were strict codes of what you could do and what you couldn't do. And believe me, I made plenty of mistakes. And a lot of them are written up in David Campbell's book, A Traveler in Two Worlds. Volume 2 is The Tinker and the Student. And there's a lot in there about my life with Duncan. And you can read that because we don't have a lot of time tonight. Okay.
Sadly, not quite enough, but we do have some time.
Yes.
But I mean, what I understood from that, I mean, there are very strict codes, but in some ways, it seemed to me that sort of his granny as well, because there's that thing of you don't step into somebody else's shoes while they're still around. So, and so, I mean, that was quite odd for me because he was telling me stories and wanting me to tell them straight back to him and to make sure that I got them right and sending me out and going, right now, Amy's going to tell us this story. And then I discovered this whole traveller thing that actually that is not a traveller way.
No.
That you should be telling the stories. You shouldn't be telling the stories until they're gone. And that was kind of a thing that his granny did for him, because then he sort of became the family storyteller at that
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah, it was an important.
She had that bit of control and she'd go, good, go on. And she would just do that subtle nudging from behind, and it gave her a way to make sure that he was doing it right before she went.
Correct. Yes. So I learned songs with Duncan. I sang with him. That was cool. That was good. That you could do that. That went on a lot, singing with them, to learn songs. And that's how they learned to play instruments as well. You would play with them, but stories were a teller and a listener. Yeah. Although he said by the time you were 5 years old, you were supposed to be able to tell your first story. So. And Betsy won a cup in Auchtermuchty for storytelling at the age of 8. So she definitely picked a lot of things up from sitting in her father's lap. But she never told stories with Duncan. He never taught her how to tell a story. There was none of that.
That's your Betsy, not Betsy White.
No, this is
your daughter.
Betsy White, my Betsy at age 8. Yeah.
Well, she proved her point.
Yeah. So we've reached the halfway right. I would like to tell a story, if that's okay, if people are still interested. This is one of the first stories that I learned from Duncan, and I must tell you, I did not tell it until after I left Duncan. It's very sad, but after 17 years and 16 books and a PhD, I was rather frazzled, I think. I had something. It must have been something like a nervous breakdown or whatever, but I had to have some space. And the children were 14 and 16 by this time. And I didn't go very far away. I just took up a room in a farmhouse about 5 miles away. And I never departed. How do you say this? I separated from Duncan and the children, but I didn't leave them. I felt I had never really left them, but that's a psychological thing.
There.
Sorry, I was still there for them, and I went back and I saw them. And eventually, when I moved into David Campbell's flat in Edinburgh, everybody was there. Betsy moved in, Tommy moved into David Campbell's flat, and Duncan always came to see us every week. It's like, I just needed space. And after working on all those stories of Duncan's and transcribing everything, I had to find my center and myself again. David Campbell's written it up very beautifully in the Tinker and the Student. But I'd like to tell you this wee story if there's time. It's
There's
called
time.
it's called The Boy, the Toad, and the Snake. And it's a children's story in one way, but it's also very adult in another. So many, many years ago, there once lived a shepherd and his wife. And they had a wee cottage by the roadside. The shepherd was a busy man and looked after his sheep, and they had one little boy. Both of them loved this boy dearly. One night, the father says to the boy, "Son, you're coming up for the age now, and I think it's about time that we should send you to school." Now, in these days, about 100 years ago, 120, you went to school in your bare feet. You wore no boots. And because the boy had never been to school before, he said, "But Daddy, how do I get to school?" And the father said, "Well, your mother will take you the first day, and the second or the third day you go to school, you go by yourself, learn to read and write, get all your education. It's only about a mile along the road." "Okay, Daddy," says the boy, "I would like that very much. I could play with the rest of the boys." Now the father says, "Whatever you do on your way back and forward to school, if you meet any animals along the road, on the road, any squirrels or rats or anything, don't interfere with them. They are nature's children. Don't interfere." "Okay," says the boy. So the mother took the boy to the school the first day, and she left him and went away home. And the boy really enjoyed himself. Oh, he had a good day in the school. He really loved it. But it was the month of May, just like now. Another reason why I've chosen this story. The summertime he started school. One day he woke up, said goodbye to his mummy, and set off to school. He had not traveled very far along the road when he came upon, in the middle of the road in his path, a toad and a snake. The snake was trying to swallow the toad. The toad was trying his best to master the snake. It was a toad, a black toad. The boy stopped. He took a stick, and he liked snakes, so he killed the toad, and the snake went away through the grass. He had battered the toad until he'd killed it. "There," he said, "that'll learn you to touch a wee snake. I like wee snakes. You ugly toad, I've killed you." And he left it lying in the road. So the summer wore on and the sun beat down, and the horses passing by in these days tramped on the toad, and they broke it all up. The toad disintegrated on the road. The end of summer passed, the school term began again, and one day the boy was in a hurry, coming home from school, running hard. He stepped on the toad, what was left of it, jag into his heel. He never thought anything of it. He came home, had his supper, and the next morning he wakened up. His mummy said, "Are you going to school today?" He said, "No, Mummy, I can't go to school. My heel's terribly sore. I've got a terrible sore heel." She said, "Well, you had better stay off school if you've got a sore heel." So by the nighttime, his father had come back. It was worse. His heel was swelled up and inflamed. His father said, "I doubt we'll have to get the quacks up to see your heel." Quacks, they were called in these days. There were no doctors. So they sent for the quack. He came and he looked at the boy's heel. "Oh," he said, "it's just maybe a thorn, a prick by a thorn. Put a poultice on it. It will be okay." They put an oatmeal poultice on it, but no. Before the night was out, the boy's leg was swelled right out. And the boy got sick and got pale and wan. His memory began to go, but his leg never got any better. They tried every medicine under the sun. It was no use. 2 weeks passed by and the boy's leg was no better. So the boy could not walk. The mother and father were terribly upset. Very, very upset. And the boy could not walk at all. So it came a beautiful day. The father says to the mother, that laddie hasn't got much fresh air inside the house. Tomorrow, you might take him outside, take him out to the garden, let him sit for a wee while and rest his foot, because it's not getting any better day out and day in. I don't know what's wrong with it. We've had all the quacks up. Everybody under the sun has seen it, and it's not getting any better. So the woman took the wee laddie out in the garden, and she left him. The wee laddie lay down with his bare foot, his two bare feet stretched out. His heel was swelled right out, inflamed and swollen. He wasn't sick anymore, but his leg wasn't getting any better. The whole leg was swollen. When lo and behold, he's sitting with his foot stretched out on the grass. The first thing he sees coming along the grass is a snake. The snake came up, head going, tail going out and in, all around in all directions, tongue going out and in, the forked tongue, and circling round about. It came up close, right to the boy's heel, to the sore part of the heel, and it started. It sucked. Sucked on the boy's heel. When the snake started to suck, the pain went away, and the boy fell sound asleep. By this time, who came back but the father into the house? He says, "Where's the laddie?" She said, "He's out in the garden." He said, "Did you leave him out there all day?" She says, I left him out. I've never heard a word from him." Well, he said, "Maybe he's dead. Maybe his leg killed him," and the shepherd runs out. He looks. There's a big adder about 3 feet long sucking the boy's heel, and the swelling was nearly away from the boy's leg. Once the man's shadow comes in within reach of the boy, the adder just disappears among the grass. And the man looks down. He runs into the house and he tells his wife, "Come out quick! Your Wayne's been bit by a snake. He's going to die." The woman comes and she lifts her laddie's leg up. The wee laddie is still sound asleep. His leg's better. The swelling is gone. The man lifted his heel up, but I saw a snake. It was sucking his heel. It was biting him. She says, "Wait a minute." The woman picked up the laddie's foot. All the redness was gone from his heel, and the wound was open. The man looked at the wound, and sticking out of it was a piece of bone, very small. The man reaches down and pulls the bone out. It was a piece of bone about 1 inch long in the boy's heel. By this time, the wee laddie wakens up and gets up onto his feet. He runs about. "Oh," he says, "Mommy, I had a dream, a great dream that a snake came and sucked my foot and made my leg better." "There's no pain, Mommy. I'm all right now. Nothing in my leg." The man said, "Son, look. That's what I took out of your foot. There was a snake sucking your foot." "Oh," he said, "I should have told you, Daddy. Maybe it was my pal, the snake." "What, pal?" says the man. Well, he said, "When I started school in the summertime, I came across the snake and a toad. They were fighting in the road. I took a stick and I killed the toad, and the snake went away." Well, the man said, "Look, that is a piece of the toad's bone that was in your foot and caused you all the trouble. You may be thankful that the snake came back and paid his debt to you and made your foot better. Nobody in the world could have cured your foot but the snake. Remember, I warned you before, never, never touch any animals you see along the road." And from that day on, until the laddie was 70 years of age, never again did he ever interfere with a toad or a snake or a wee animal along the way. And that's a story I learned from Duncan. I hope you like it. It's a bit. Yeah.
It's a great story, and like you said, I think Duncan's stories are like that a lot. They, on the surface, they're very simple, but when you look at them again, then actually there's kind of quite a lot of layers and quite a lot of things within that. And lots of people on the chat are all saying "Thank you, Linda," and applause and clapping. So yeah, everybody.
But there is, if you study Asclepius and some of the Greek myths about, he was the first, doctor, one of the first doctors and the caduceus and all these things with snakes that have to do with health and medicine. This story fits right in there, just like a glove. And what's more, right now at 8:30 in the east is rising the constellation of Ophiuchus. That is the snake bearer. And Serpens caput and Serpens cadua are the head of the snake and the tail of the snake. And the head of the snake is coming up right now, and the tail of the snake will follow in about 2 hours. And if you're wondering how I know that, this is what I've been doing since Duncan died. I've been tracking his stories to the stars. And here's a planisphere from Canada. They're very, very accurate there with their stargazing. And many of our stories have counterparts in the stars. That story there about the snake, you can find that as the constellation Ophiuchus, the snake bearer. And the boy and the snake has the same connection. And it's not too wild. You can watch the movement of the constellation across the heavens and find out which month it is rising and which month it does not appear in the northern sky. And I chose that story tonight for you about the snake because it's set in May for a start. It was May when the boy went to school. And the constellation is rising in May at this time. And the full moon will pass through that constellation in 2 days' time. So if the story moves you, it's probably something to do with the stars as well. And that's how out of all the hundreds of stories I recorded from Duncan and that are in my head, I have to have some means of selecting or choosing a story. And that's what I'm into at the moment, is tracking it, not astrology, but astronomy. So that's where we are.
If you follow Linda on Facebook, it's great because it's one of my brilliant ways. I've been learning much more about the stars the last year because I've been following you, and kind of each month is kind of like a different focus.
That's
story.
Exactly right. Yep. Because the heavens are all
learning some of the stars, the constellations that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
We have got lots of other things to talk about, but the bit we skipped that I would really love to hear about is that bit, because you met Duncan and then you'd finished with him, but it was kind of and there's that bit in the middle, and I know how hard it was for me when I had my babies, and I cannot imagine, not having been brought up to it, what it must have been like with small children living in a tent. And I think that travellers are really idealised a lot of the time, and there's this very romantic notion. And one of the things that I really learned from Duncan is that I loved him. I loved the stories. I loved the song. I liked the idea of travellers, but I am not strong enough to be a traveller. It sounds like hell, to be honest. I mean, it's so, you have to be so strong and such hard work.
Yeah.
How do you cope?
How did I do it? Well, I was strong at that time. Along with music from America, I was also an athlete. I was a speed skater, a figure skater, and a runner. And I was swimming every summer across lakes and so on. We lived in an area where it was solid lakes and rivers. So I was very fit. I was very athletic. And I remember when Duncan and I first got together, we raced. I said, come on, we'll see who can run faster. And he did beat me by a bit, but he was 21 years older than I was. He was 47 at that time, and I was 26. So he was very strong. He was an Iron Man. When I took his arm for the first time walking over the Tay Bridge, we weren't together then. We were just friends. It was like grabbing onto an iron rod, a bar of iron. He was just so strong. And the struggles that I faced in the tent, learning how to keep clean myself, my body, and wash the children without running water, and all the baths and things, and keeping the place tidy, and learning how to cook, and just every single basic thing that we take for granted now, lights and water. You have to start all over from scratch when you're living under canvas. And there was no house on the horizon. It was like, it's not a holiday. This is for real. This is it. This is permanent. That's the way it was. And yeah, it was hard going, but Duncan was a master at what he did. And his family helped me. His granddaughters would come in and show me how to tidy up, and they were like little fairies. At age 4 and 5, they could do things that I was just learning how to do it in my 20s. So yeah, it was good. And Betsy and Tommy, they survived, and they can't think about living in tents now, or they wouldn't do it. But to me, to be close to nature is what we all need to do. We need to get back there. We need to get back and be primitive and shed. We need to be stronger and resilient and learn how to survive better with nature, and caring for the trees and the flowers, and learning how to keep water clean, yeah, and make sure that animals have the right things they need for survival, the wildlife. Yeah. And Duncan's stories take you right there, don't they, Amy? I mean, that's what this is all about, is how relevant Duncan's stories are now, especially with what's gone down with illness and viruses and things like that.
Absolutely. I totally think that they're needed more than ever, but it kind of leads on. We've had a question on the Q&A from Abby that just really leads into that. So Abby, if I can find you on the list, I'm gonna unmute you and let you ask that, if that's okay. So you're allowed to talk, Abby. So
lovely. Hi, Abby.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Fab. So it struck me when you were talking about what you giving yourself kind of in exchange, as it were, for these stories. And I think it's amazing to have access to Duncan's stories, and it's amazing that he wanted them told, and that he still wants them told, as it were. But I'm wondering, as storytellers, what can we do to give back to the Scottish travellers? How can we, so that we're not just consuming these stories and taking them, what can we do, and how, if you've got any ideas?
Yeah, well, just whenever you tell one of their stories, be sure to credit, the source, yeah. And the other thing is, you can I don't know if you can make friends with the traveling people, but there will be gypsies and travelers, I'm sure, not far. Where are you living?
I'm down in Sussex.
You're down in Sussex. There will be traveling people and gypsies down there, and just, you know, you try to keep your eyes open for them. They're so different in appearance. You know when it's a gypsy or a traveler. I remember going to Greece. This is a totally strange country, and I knew immediately. I could see gypsies. I could spot them because their complexion, their stature, their dress, everything about them marks them as traveling people or gypsies or the ethnic minority. Yeah, the wander people, and make friends with them, speak to them, because they appreciate your friendship. They do, they will, as long as you have good intentions, and they'll give you 1,000 times more than you would ever ask for, you know. It's the same with Indians. If you go to India, has anybody been to India on my list? They're very big-hearted, generous, giving people. It's not, when they know that you are genuinely interested in them, they'll come back 1,000-fold. That's the way it was.
I mean, it's definitely, it's an issue that I really struggle with. And it's because, you know, Duncan gave me all these stories. I want to celebrate him. I want to honour his memory, and I want to pass those stories on. But I don't want to be seen as sort of riding on his coattails and making a living out of him. And that's something that travellers, like you were saying, are very funny about. And I know that some travellers don't like me and don't like what I'm doing because they perceive that I'm making money out of Duncan, which...
Well, they haven't... It's still early days. You haven't really done your work yet. So they're just, you know, it's just a bit of fear, and it's unknown. They're projecting. I mean, you're just starting.
Those are people as well that don't know me, I hope. So
yeah, it's just a matter of getting more familiar with them, and they'll learn by your work. They'll learn by your actions. They will be able to suss that out. They'll see that your intentions are absolutely honorable and right.
I mean, for me, one of the things that I'm really trying to do, and I don't know if they'll appreciate this or not, but certainly on the traveller sites, there's that awful programme on Channel 4, which I must go and watch just to see what it actually is. But everybody's talking that it's a programme that shows the travellers in a really bad light from what the travellers have been saying. And I suppose that's the thing for me, is that at least I'm going out and I'm giving a different view about the travellers, because they're the one race that it seems to be okay to be racist about. People that I think are quite liberal, and then I've heard suddenly some people go, "Oh, what do you think?" You know, "Oh, I've been in the garden all day. Look at your mess. I look like a dirty dippo." And I was literally, my mouth sort of fell open, and that seems to be something that seems to be okay. Some people think that's still okay, and they have this image. So at least if I'm going out there and kind of trying to make travellers into people, and there's a connection there, and showing showing the heart and the traditions that people don't know about, and trying to fight some of that racism. That's what I'm trying to give back. I mean, obviously when Duncan was alive, I'd clean his cupboards. That'd be my thing. I'd turn up with food and I'd clean the house.
Yeah, exactly. It's what you do that counts. Don't take on other people's problems and prejudices. Don't take that on. Just do your own thing. Keep on the path. You know what you're doing is right. Just go for it and do it, because you will be marked by what you do. Sorry?
It is to have that check, though. It's just like a little voice going, am I doing the right thing? Am I comfortable with this?
You are.
I think I am.
You are. You've got the right support now. You've done things in the right order. Yep.
So, are there? We are just about out of time. So we've had Abby's question, we've got a few more on here. So, David, I think we've answered your question. So David is saying, how can we share the man's stories and carry stories on, and we can use Duncan's stories? Yes, I think that's what we've been talking about.
Yep.
I'm just checking on the on the story. So Norma's saying Duncan is standing behind you when you share his tales. Yes, he is, and he's not silent about it.
No.
I don't know if you have that as well, Linda, but I generally have. Yeah, he's generally telling me if I'm doing a good job or not in my ear.
Yeah.
Goodbye, Claire. She has to leave.
Oh, bye, Claire.
Angela, it's lovely to see you too. Simon, right, Simon has a question. I am going to stick Simon on to talk as well to ask his question. Simon, hopefully we can hear you.
I'm there. I'm unmuted. Yeah. Is that good? Yeah.
Unmuted.
Yeah. I wanted to know, I mean, the question that always fascinates me when having, and the many things that fascinate me about these conversations, I just wonder, are the family or travelling communities still telling the stories and singing the songs among themselves, or is it mainly something that has tended to sort of fall by the wayside over the passage of time? Do you know?
No, it's not falling by the wayside.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, Duncan's eldest son, is always telling his father's stories and to his children and grandchildren, and singing. He's a songwriter and singer, but it's not everybody who tells stories. You know, they all know the stories. It's like my own children. They know the stories word for word. They can tell me when I'm making a mess of things, and they do. But they don't necessarily. Well, Betsy's a good storyteller. They like to have books, and they come and go with the traveler material back and forwards between, you know, public other storytellers and other authors. So I can't answer Simon for the traveling people, because since Duncan's death, I haven't been very much in touch with them. It's just Duncan's eldest son really that stays close to me in communicating, that is, and the others I hear about vicariously from others, but I don't really know what is in the community at the moment. So, but I know in my heart that the traditions and the stories are going on, because that's really all they have. Duncan would say, that's all we had in our life. That was our education. It's like they are stories. The traveling people are stories. That's it's not just an identity, it's their being, it's their soul. So as easy as it is for you and me to talk is how easy it is for them to tell stories and sing songs.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's nearly time, it is really time for us to come to a close, but we've been talking about Duncan, but also tonight is about you, Linda. So I want to finish with where you're at, because you're still really busy and active, and you're still working with Duncan's material, and you're still bringing out new books, aren't you?
Yes, I'm always thinking about collections of stories, because I have at least another 100 here that haven't been published. So I'm always thinking about that, and I'd love to have a book, a biography or an autobiography about me and Duncan. Yeah, something like that in my life. Yeah, I would like to write it. The one that's out there now is written by David Campbell, who is a close friend to both of us, but obviously things are through his eyes. And so I am considering that all the time. But I'm a busy grandmother. I've got 4 grandchildren here, and I've got another 6 in America, and a great grandchild over there. So I need time to spend with them. I would like to get back there, but it probably won't be this September now with all this business with the virus and stuff. I'll have to wait. However, it'll happen.
So you sent me a list, and I've got a list of books as well. So we've got a list of the books that you have now, which I am going to put onto my Facebook page. It will be, because it's quite a lot. I thought about putting it up in the chat, but it's quite long. So if you're interested in the books that are out, and Linda, you've been putting some of the new collections of Duncan stories as well that are slightly more anglicised, because some people find the early ones that are transcribed, when
Yeah.
you haven't heard Duncan's voice, they can be quite tricky to read.
Yeah.
And I think they're tricky for children as well. So some that are a little bit easier
Yeah.
to read, and beautiful collections. They've got some new stories in them as well.
Yeah.
Mike's saying, oh, the travellers I know around here sing a lot of country and western. Well, so did Duncan. I think country and western songs are very traveller songs, and they're very similar to the ballads. They're about love, and they're quite sentimental, and they're
well, that was Duncan's favorite. That was his favorite music, was country and western. Absolutely. Well, apart from the ballads, they were a slightly different category because they were family transmitted, but he liked listening to country and western music. He loved that. Yeah.
But they're also, and again, they have a similar structure in some ways to ballads. They're quite easy to listen and then to pass on. They tend to be very visual in the way that ballads are as well. I think kind of the two genres do go kind of quite well together, and they're ones that work to be sung, sung around the fire.
It's the sentiments, the sentimentality of country and western, the emotions and the struggles and the tensions, whatever, that are in there with love and separation and heartache and all that. The travelers just love that, because that's how that's the level that they're at. That's the level they're on. Yeah.
Oh, well, then we're going to wrap it up now. There's other messages on the chat. I'm just Angela's just saying that she told the Tainawa today. She was
brilliant, very
so
good.
Distance to walking, somebody who's new to storytelling, and was telling them the story of the Tainawa.
May month is the time of the fairies, and so the Tainawa, Archie, and the little people, all the stories about fairies should come now for the season.
They're all in my absolutely. I'm going to be in quite a bit. David, how I know Duncan. There's quite a lot on my website, on my Facebook page, about how I know Duncan, and that's a story for another day. So
when I left Duncan, Amy was right there. She's my sister. She's my soulmate. She took my place in a very real way, in a very real sense. Not as a wife, but as
not as a wife.
No, but as Duncan's soulmate, she was there. She was there. Yeah.
We met each other at a time when we really needed each other. So and then I got to have this vision of you through his eyes, Linda, and he loved you so much. And then I got to meet you, and I discovered it wasn't rose tinted at all. And it was just a joy, an absolute joy meeting you, because I was quite terrified of what you'd be like, because I knew what a strong woman you were, and I wasn't sure how you would feel about me, kind of being with Duncan so much. And then you just touched my heart straight away, and you just came up to me and said, thank you for being there and looking after Duncan when I wasn't there. And it meant such a lot.
Yeah, it still means a lot to me, Amy. It still means a lot. We're still very much a trio, you, me, and him. Very
Absolutely.
Good. Yeah.
So we need to wrap this up now, but we will talk again, Linda. And thank you all very much for everybody joining us tonight. Thank you for coming. And I know you probably have more questions, but there are so many beautiful memories that Linda has put up just recently on her Facebook page. I really recommend go and read the story about the water boatman. We didn't have time to talk about that tonight. So many stories that we didn't tell tonight. So check out Linda's Facebook page. Come to my Facebook page for the list of Linda's books, which she may well put up on her own Facebook page as well. I will be back here next Tuesday at 8 o'clock with Helen East and Rick Wilson, and we're going to be having another Duncan celebration. Helen East and Rick Wilson also knew Duncan really well, and they also studied with him and got stories with him. They did a lot of swapping of sort of stories from India and stories from Scotland, and there was a real kind of meeting of different traditions, and we did a lot of camping together, so there'll be a different feel to next week, but we'll still be talking about Duncan. And if any of you would like some totally different sort of storytelling, it is Blast online this Friday. So again, there's a Facebook event on my page and on the Blast website. So Sheila Arnold, he was my guest on Taking the Tradition on last week. Sheila Arnold will be performing this Friday, so buy your tickets. Don't leave it to the last minute, because there's only me doing everything. So if you buy your ticket at 8 o'clock, I will be busy introducing Sheila and I won't be able to send you the email with the invite. I think that's all my notices. All I need to do is say to Linda Williamson once again, thank you so much for coming, taking the tradition on.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Good night, and thank you all.
Good night.